Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast, where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, before we get into everything, I just want to wish you, our listeners, and of course you sitting across from me, a very happy Easter.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, happy Easter to you too.
It's definitely a day usually reserved for family, you know.
It is, yeah. Honestly, it's a bit of a strange juxtaposition today.
How so?
Well, I've just been sitting here reviewing my notes for the case we're about to explore, and I can literally look out my window and see my neighborhood preparing for, those chaotic family egg hunts in the backyard.
Right. The contrast is definitely palpable.
Exactly. It's just jarring.
Because today is a day defined almost entirely by family, by safety.
Absolutely.
It's about those core memories you build within the walls of your own home. Like, I know I'll be sitting down to the traditional giant ham and deviled eggs later.
Same here.
But, it's exactly that assumed safety, that deeply held belief that our children are completely secure when they are tucked into their beds at night. That makes today's examination so shattering.
It really does. It strikes right at that primal fear.
It does. I want you to imagine a 9-year-old child, a little girl named Asha Degree.
Okay.
She is terrified of the dark.
Okay.
And she is terrified of dogs.
Which is pretty common for a 9-year-old, but she was specifically very fearful.
Exactly. Yet, despite all of that, she is willingly walking entirely alone on a rural North Carolina highway in the middle of a furious, freezing rainstorm.
It's just an incredibly haunting image.
It is. It is the pre-dawn hours of February 14, 2000. Pitch blackout, torrential rain.
Yeah.
And she is out there completely by herself.
And that psychological contradiction of that single image, that's really the engine behind this entire 26-year mystery.
Because it just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Investigators, forensic profilers, they have wrestled with this for literally decades.
I mean, you have a child whose behavioral profile suggests, extreme compliance.
Exactly. Extreme compliance, a massive fear of the unknown, and yet she is engaging in this incredibly high-risk, exposure-heavy action.
Stepping out into a storm.
Right. And because the initial facts so completely defied conventional logic, that vacuum was immediately filled by the public.
Oh, absolutely. The internet just took it and ran.
Right, with intense, often really convoluted speculation.
Well, our mission today is to cut through that speculation. We are going to trace how tiny, seemingly insignificant fragments of evidence have fundamentally shifted in meaning over the last 26 years.
It's fascinating how evidence evolves.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are going to explore the mechanics of how this case transformed from a baffling missing persons investigation.
Where everyone just assumes she ran away.
Right, exactly. How it transformed from that into a massive active homicide investigation involving a potential multi-generational family cover-up.
Which is just a massive shift in perspective.
It's huge. So where do we start?
Well, to accurately chart that shift, the baseline context of Asha's environment in Shelby, North Carolina is critical.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So in 2000, the Degree family, that's Asha, her older brother O'Brien, and her parents Harold and Aquila, they operated within a highly structured, very insulated sphere.
Very tight-knit.
Very. Their lives revolved around church, school, and home. That was it.
I remember reading that Aquila was specifically wary of outside influences.
Oh, absolutely. To the point that they did not even have a computer in the house.
Wow. In 2000, that's getting rarer.
Right. The internet was definitely around, but they didn't have it. Which means the whole idea of exposure to external predators via the web.
Which became this huge dominant theory online later on.
Exactly. But it's forensically improbable given the household's total technological isolation.
Right. She wasn't secretly chatting in AOL chat rooms.
She just didn't have the access.
So knowing that strict boundary, we really have to look at the immediate catalyst. The long weekend right before she disappeared.
Yeah, and it offers very little in the way of a psychological trigger.
Let's walk through it. Friday, February 11th, she's off school. She goes to basketball practice. Normal kid stuff.
Totally normal.
Then Saturday, her local youth basketball team suffers their first loss of the season.
And she fouls out of the game.
Right. And she cries, which honestly is entirely expected for a competitive 9-year-old.
Oh, for sure. It feels like the end of the world at that age.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is no lingering trauma there. She actually stays to watch her brother play his game right after.
She bounces back.
Yeah. And that evening, she attends a sleepover with her cousin Katina. They stay up late watching TV.
Just completely typical healthy behavior for a kid that age.
Right, so then we hit Sunday, February 13th.
Which follows that exact same mundane pattern.
They go to church, they come back home. Harold leaves for his second shift job at the nearby PPG Industries plant.
Right, he worked a late shift.
Yeah. So Asha and O'Brien go to sleep in their shared bedroom around 8:00 p.m. But then the timeline fractures at 9:00
The
p.m.
power outage.
Yes. A car crash in the immediate neighborhood completely knocks out the power grid.
And the mechanics of that power outage are really essential to think about.
I totally agree. The house doesn't just go dark, right?
Mm.
It loses the ambient hum of electricity.
The refrigerator stops buzzing, the heater cuts out.
It basically becomes this sensory deprivation chamber, filled only with the white noise of this raging thunderstorm outside.
Which is terrifying for a kid who is already afraid of the dark.
Exactly. So Harold returns from his shift just after midnight, and the power is restored right around 12:30 a.m.
And he physically checks on the children.
He does. Both are fast asleep. He even checks again at 2:30 a.m. before he goes to bed himself.
But then, at 3 a.m., something happens.
Right. O'Brien, her brother, hears Asha's bed squeak.
Now, auditory processing during sleep often misinterprets anomalies as just routine background noise.
Yeah, you're half asleep. You just rationalize it.
Exactly. O'Brien assumes she is merely adjusting her position, rolling over, and he falls right back asleep.
But the reality of that acoustic signal is so much darker. It was actually Asha packing her book bag with multiple sets of clothes and leaving the house.
Yes. And the power outage introduces a really critical variable here that we have to discuss.
The digital clocks.
Digital clocks. When power is restored after a 3.5-hour blackout, clocks typically just flash 12:00.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they don't automatically reset back then.
Exactly. So if Asha had formulated a plan to leave the house prior to dawn, perhaps to meet someone or just to embark on some sort of adolescent adventure, she would have been relying on compromised timekeeping.
So she might have woken up, seen a flashing 12:00 or a completely wrong time, and thought it was way later than it was.
She very well may have believed she was leaving much closer to morning daylight than 3:00 a.m.
That is such a tragic detail. If she misjudged the time, she stepped into the absolute worst possible scenario.
A 1.5-mile walk south down Highway 18.
And this is not a neighborhood sidewalk. This is a rural arterial road. Minimal lighting, battered by freezing rain.
It's a hostile environment for anyone, let alone a 9-year-old.
And the confirmation that she actually took this specific route comes from an incredibly confusing piece of spatial evidence.
Shed.
Right, the shed at Debbie Turner Upholstery.
So this upholstery business sits roughly 300 feet off Highway 18. And it's down this long, unlit driveway.
It's not right on the road at all.
Not at all. But days after she vanished, search teams located several items in an open-air shed on that property.
They found a Mickey Mouse hair bow, a pencil, a marker, and some candy wrappers.
All of which were definitively linked to Asha.
But here is where the narrative hits a massive structural wall for me.
The dogs.
Yes. We have a child who supposedly fears the dark and fears dogs. Why would she seek shelter in a shed directly adjacent to a pen of loud beagles?
It's a huge contradiction.
The acoustic footprint of hunting hounds, disturbed in the middle of a thunderstorm by a stranger walking up, it would be deafening.
Absolutely deafening.
That psychological contradiction is exactly what makes this detail so chilling to me. If she was terrified of dogs, she does not willingly walk 300 feet toward a barking kennel just to get out of the rain.
No, she wouldn't.
So you have to ask, was she lured down that driveway? Or was she forced off the road by a vehicle?
The spatial logistics strongly suggest evasion rather than just casual shelter seeking.
Like she was hiding.
Exactly. Pushing past a known phobia, like her fear of dogs, requires an even greater immediate terror.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
Either the threat of hypothermia completely overrode her fear of the animals, or she was fleeing a mobile threat on Highway 18, and that shed offered the only immediate concealment in the topography.
She was running from something worse than the dogs.
That's what it points to.
God. So the morning of Monday, February 14th, shatters the entire family structure.
It's just devastating.
And it's supposed to be Valentine's Day, and awfully, it's Harold and Aquila's wedding anniversary.
Of all days.
At 5:45 a.m., Aquila wakes up to draw a bath for the children. O'Brien is in his bed, but Asha is not.
And you can only imagine the immediate panic.
When Aquila realizes Asha is gone, she isn't just looking for Runaway. She's looking for a child acting entirely out of character.
Right, because everything about this breaks Asha's normal behavioral pattern.
The panic leads to immediate police involvement. But the meteorological conditions of the night completely neutralize that early forensic response.
The weather was their worst enemy here.
The freezing rain has just washed away everything. Tire tracks, footprints, any olfactory trail for the tracking dogs is just gone.
It was essentially an environmental erasure.
That's a great way to put it.
The initial investigation stalled entirely because the elements stripped the physical landscape of all data.
They had nothing to work with.
Nothing. The authorities had the items in the shed, they had the frantic statements of the family, and that was it.
And that evidentiary void lasted for 18 agonizing months.
Which is a lifetime in a missing child case.
Which makes the discovery on August 3, 2001, the ultimate pivot point of the entire investigation.
The backpack.
Yes. A contractor named Terry Fleming is operating heavy excavation equipment for a construction project in Morganton.
Which is located in Burke County.
Right. This is 26 miles north of Shelby. And he unearths Asha's backpack.
And Terry Fleming finding that bag 26 miles north, it completely shatters the original search radius.
Totally. Because if she was last seen walking south on Highway 18, the perpetrator had to have intercepted her, put her in a vehicle, and driven in the exact opposite direction for nearly half an hour.
Which tells us a lot about the offender.
To me, that doesn't scream crime of opportunity by a local walker. That screams vehicular mobility and a deliberate, calculated geographic displacement.
The geographic factor is incredibly vital. The route from Shelby to Morganton utilizes the very same Highway 18.
So they drove right back past where they found her.
Exactly. Whoever took that bag traveled the exact corridor where Asha was last seen, just in reverse.
It's so brazen.
But the true forensic value isn't just where it was found, it is how it was interred.
This part always gets me. The backpack was double bagged in heavy-duty black plastic trash bags and meticulously buried deep underground.
Which is not how you just toss something away in a panic.
No. Burying that backpack in double-bagged heavy plastic wasn't a casual disposal. It was the forensic equivalent of amber trapping a mosquito.
I love that analogy. It's perfectly accurate.
They deliberately attempted to protect themselves from discovery, but by isolating the backpack from moisture and soil degradation, they essentially cryopreserved the evidence.
For a future generation of technology that didn't even exist in 2001.
Exactly.
The mechanics of underground degradation are highly dependent on aerobic bacteria and moisture. So by sealing the bag in dense polymers, the perpetrator created this perfect anaerobic, temperature-stable environment.
It's almost like they built a time capsule.
It is a structured disposal. It indicates a perpetrator who possessed enough cognitive presence post-event to systematically sanitize their connection to the victim.
They weren't just fleeing wildly. They took their time to hide this.
Right.
And the contents of the bag introduce a whole new layer of manipulation.
The anomalous items.
Yes. When law enforcement finally detailed the contents years later, they revealed items that explicitly did not belong to Asha.
Which is baffling.
First, a library book. A Dr. Seuss book titled McElligot's Pool, sourced from Falston Elementary School.
Which is the school Asha attended.
Right. However, the school's analog checkout records couldn't trace its recent history. And her parents confirmed it definitely wasn't hers.
Okay, so that's one item.
The second, a New Kids on the Block concert nightshirt.
Now, this is crucial. NKOTB peaked a decade prior to this.
Yeah, in the late 80s, early 90s, right.
Asha is 9 years old in the year 2000. This is not her cultural era. She's not listening to New Kids on the Block.
Her mother had never seen the garment in her life.
So analyzing these anomalous items requires distinguishing between a psychological trophy and a forensic countermeasure.
Explain the difference there.
Well, forensic psychologists often note that trophies, items kept to relive the offense, are usually kept in close proximity to the offender.
Like hidden in a closet or under the floorboards in their house.
Right, where they can be accessed and looked at.
Okay, yeah. Burying a New Kids on the Block shirt and a library book 26 miles away in a double bag points much more strongly to a sterile panic disposal than a sentimental one.
Exactly. It doesn't fit the profile of a trophy.
So is it A calculated red herring. Did the perpetrator deliberately plant a book from her specific elementary school and a random T-shirt to intentionally force investigators to waste resources looking for a specific fan profile or a school employee?
A red herring of that nature implies an incredibly high degree of forensic awareness, like strategic manipulation on a level you rarely see in impulsive crimes.
But there is another piece to this puzzle that alters the weight of those items.
The holdback evidence.
Yes. The individual who excavated the bag, Terry Fleming, he went on record stating there was one specific item inside that disturbed him so profoundly that he outright refused to describe it publicly.
Which is a heavy statement from a guy who works construction.
Right. And law enforcement has rigorously guarded the identity of this unspoken item. They will not release what it is.
The utility of holdback evidence is fascinating in these long-term cases.
It's basically their only trump card, right?
Exactly. The police intentionally suppress a highly specific, visceral detail. If a suspect ever walks into an interrogation room and attempts to confess, perhaps seeking notoriety or maybe trying to cover for someone else,
The detectives require them to name that unspoken item.
right, if they can't describe it, the confession is demonstrably false.
But knowing that an item exists in that bag, something that horrified a seasoned construction worker, it casts a very dark, oppressive shadow over the entire discovery.
It really does. It fundamentally reframes the morning she vanished. Well, the discovery of the bag forces us to retroactively analyze the eyewitness accounts from the pre-dawn hours of February 14th. We have to look at them with a much more critical lens.
Because the initial theory heavily relied on those two motorist sightings.
Right, so let's re-examine those motorists.
Around 4 a.m., a trucker named Jeff Ruppy is driving his route. He spots a small figure in a white long-sleeve shirt and white pants walking south on Highway 18 in the torrential rain.
And the visual is so alarming to him that he physically turns his massive commercial vehicle around on a 2-lane road.
Which takes a lot of effort.
It does, and he circles back 3 separate times.
And in response, Asha bolts. She leaves the asphalt, runs into the adjacent field, and disappears into the tree line.
Then, 30 minutes later, around 4:30 a.m., another motorist, Roy Blanton Sr., spots her near the intersection of Highway 18 and Highway 180.
So the investigative bias for years was to view her flight into the woods purely through the runaway child paradigm.
Exactly. A sheltered girl, indoctrinated with stranger danger warnings, sees a massive semi-truck repeatedly circling her in the dark.
She panics, and she seeks concealment.
Right. It perfectly fit the narrative of a child actively evading detection by well-meaning adults.
But the presence of that buried backpack 26 miles away demands we hypothesize a different scenario entirely.
Right, the context changes.
What if she wasn't running from the truck at all?
Oh, this is the crux of it.
What if she had already encountered the threat, and the sweeping headlights of Jeff Ruby's truck suddenly illuminated the danger she was already fleeing?
Or, conversely, if she was intentionally waiting for someone she knew.
The arrival of a massive commercial truck wasn't the vehicle she was expecting.
Exactly. Prompting her to hide until her actual ride arrived.
Let's talk about the visibility out there, because it's key.
The physics of lighting on a rural, unlit highway during a squall means visibility is strictly limited to the cone of the headlights.
Right. Outside that cone, it's just a black wall.
Exactly. So if there was another vehicle idling on the shoulder further down the road, or someone pursuing her on foot,
Ruppy's headlights might not have caught them.
but Asha would have been acutely aware of their proximity. She might have been running from someone just outside the light.
That theoretical other vehicle is exactly what cracks this case wide open later on.
It took a long time, though.
A very long time. In 2016, a full 16 years after Asha disappeared, the FBI releases a highly specific, localized tip to the public.
And this changed everything.
They announced they are looking for a dark green 1970s Lincoln Mark IV or potentially a Ford Thunderbird.
With distinct rust around the wheel wells.
Right. A witness had reported seeing someone matching Asha's description getting into a vehicle fitting this profile near the location she was last seen.
Now, the mechanics of how the FBI handles tips explain the 16-year delay here. People always ask, why did it take 16 years to release this?
Yeah, it seems crazy.
But federal agencies accumulate massive databases of raw intelligence. A single tip regarding a rusty green car might sit uncorroborated for a decade.
Until a secondary piece of intelligence validates it.
Exactly. Elevating it from just background noise to actionable intelligence.
And that actionable intelligence finally materialized with devastating clarity between 2024 and 2026.
A massive leap forward.
The narrative of Asha Degree completely inverted. It is no longer an open missing persons cold case.
No.
It is an active, named homicide investigation. And the catalyst for this shift brings us right back to the double bag backpack.
It all comes back to the bag. The preservation we discussed earlier allowed investigators to leverage a technology that simply did not exist in 2001.
Advanced genetic genealogy.
Yes. Unlike standard STR-DNA profiling, which is what they used to use, where they look for 20 specific markers to find a direct one-to-one match in a criminal database like CODIS.
Which only works if the person is already in the system.
Right. But advanced genetic genealogy sequences hundreds of thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs.
This is the exact same mechanism used to identify the Golden State Killer, right?
Exactly the same. They took the degraded touch DNA extracted from the preserved items in the backpack.
Likely the plastic itself, or maybe that anomalous New Kids on the Block shirt.
Right, and they uploaded that dense genetic profile to public genealogy databases.
Just walk us through exactly how it functions briefly.
Sure. It's a matter of mapping shared DNA segments, known as centimorgans, by finding distant third or fourth cousins in these databases who share small segments of DNA with the profile found on the backpack.
The genealogists basically work backward.
Exactly. They build these massive family trees, cross-referencing census data, birth records, and geography until they draw a digital net over a single familial line.
And the net dropped squarely over the Deadman family tree in the local area.
Which led to a massive tactical escalation.
It did. In September 2024, the FBI, alongside local North Carolina authorities, executed sweeping search warrants on properties owned by Roy and Connie Deadman.
And the physical evidence they seized connected the genetic science directly to that 2016 witness tip.
Yes, they confiscated a green 1960s AMC Rambler.
Now, the automotive specifics are highly corroborative here.
Because the original tip said 1970s Lincoln or Thunderbird.
Right. But an AMC Rambler from the 1960s shares that exact wide-bodied, heavy steel aesthetic.
Especially in the pitch black through heavy rain.
A witness recalling a vintage dark green wide-set vehicle with rusted wheel wells is providing an incredibly accurate core description.
Even if they didn't get the specific manufacturing badge right.
Exactly. It's completely understandable.
The seizure of that Rambler brings the horrific reality of the current working theory into focus.
It's a very difficult theory to process.
According to unsealed information, a former associate of the Deadman family provided a confession to investigators.
Which gave them the whole narrative.
This individual alleged that on the night of the storm in 2000, one of the Deadman daughters, who was a 16-year-old high school student at the time, was driving that green AMC Rambler on Highway 18.
In that awful weather.
And the allegation is that she struck a child walking on the road.
OSHA.
Yes. And this hit-and-run theory entirely dismantles the long-standing predator hypothesis.
Completely. We are no longer looking at a calculated abduction, grooming, or a stranger danger scenario.
We're looking at the brutal physics of a vehicular accident.
A wide-body steel car operating in zero visibility conditions striking a 60-pound 9-year-old.
The immediate aftermath of such an impact. That is the crucible where this entire mystery was forged.
The logistics of what happens next are staggering.
I mean, if a 16-year-old driver hits a pedestrian, the legal and moral imperative is to dial 911. You get help.
But the theory posits that this tragedy instantly metastasized into a calculated multi-generational family cover-up.
The teenager, operating in blind panic, likely contacted her parents.
And analyzing the group dynamics of a cover-up like this reveals the concept of toxic family enmeshment.
Tell me more about that.
It is a psychological environment where the preservation of the family unit or the protection of a specific member from legal consequences entirely overrides basic human empathy or legal obligations.
So the parents arrive at the scene of the accident.
They are faced with the body of a child and the ruined life of their teenager.
And they make a collective, instantaneous decision to erase the event.
To protect their own.
To execute that erasure, they have to physically load Asha's body into a vehicle.
Which is an incredibly gruesome reality.
They have to hide the AMC Rambler from public view, allowing it to rust away in a garage for decades.
Right.
They gather her belongings, maybe place anomalous items inside her backpack, perhaps items that were just sitting in the trunk of the car already.
That would explain the NKOTB shirt. Just a random rag in the trunk.
Exactly. They drive 26 miles to Burke County, meticulously double-bag the evidence in heavy plastic, and bury it.
And the psychological burden of maintaining that compartmentalization is immense.
I cannot even fathom it.
You have an entire family sitting around Thanksgiving tables, celebrating birthdays, and navigating daily life in the very same region where Harold and Aquila Degree are publicly agonizing over their missing daughter.
Seeing them on the news year after year.
Right. To never let the mask slip, to enforce absolute silence among multiple family members for over a quarter of a century.
It requires an oppressive, ironclad control within the family dynamic.
It really does.
But the supreme irony of this multi-generational silence is how they ultimately defeated themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked about how carefully they wrapped that backpack.
Yes, the double bagging.
They did that to protect themselves, to ensure the evidence remained permanently hidden. They thought they were burying a secret forever.
But by sealing it in heavy plastic to thwart the elements, they successfully insulated the touch DNA on the shirt from the damp soil.
Their own meticulousness, their own desperate need to control the environment of the burial site, preserved the very biological signatures that allowed advanced science to identify them 2 decades later.
It is a profound forensic paradox.
The act of concealment was the actual mechanism of their eventual discovery.
It's incredible. However, we must ground this discussion in the current legal reality.
Right. Let's look at where we are now.
As we examine this in March of 2026, no formal criminal charges have been filed against the Dedman family.
Important to note.
Very important. The search warrants have been executed, the AMC Rambler has been seized, and they remain the primary focus of a massive homicide investigation.
But the legal architecture of a prosecution is still being built.
Building a circumstantial historical homicide case without the victim's remains is an incredibly steep hill for prosecutors.
That is why the $100,000 reward for the recovery of Asha's remains is still highly active today.
Yes, they still need to bring her home.
And this creates a heartbreaking equilibrium for the community and the family.
How do you mean?
Well, there's the profound relief of finally piercing the veil of the mystery, of understanding the mechanics of how and who.
Right, getting answers.
But that relief is entirely weighed down by the grim reality of what those answers actually are.
It's a devastating truth.
Asha didn't secretly start a new life. She didn't fall victim to a sophisticated internet predator.
No.
She was killed in a sudden, violent accident, and her existence was discarded to protect a teenager's future.
It really forces a reckoning with how we consume these mysteries as a public.
It does. For decades, internet forums constructed elaborate, almost cinematic narratives around her disappearance.
Cults, secret pen pals mailing her cash, complex grooming operations.
The human brain abhors a vacuum. And so the public filled the evidentiary void with incredible complexity.
But the physical evidence, the heavy steel of a 1960s AMC Rambler and microscopic cellular material preserved on a synthetic shirt, shattered all of the cinematic narratives.
It reminds us that the truth is often so banal. It's defined by panic, poor visibility, and terrible, terrible choices made in the dark.
It shows us how a few disparate fragments can endure underground, waiting patiently for the scientific lens to bring them into terrifying focus.
Those fragments finally told the story of what happened to Asha on Highway 18, even if the ultimate legal resolution is still just over the horizon.
A woman checks into a luxury hotel in Oslo under a false name, lives without a clear identity, and is later found dead in a locked room. Next time, we examine the mysterious case of Jennifer Fergate.